leadership, agile leader, leadership agility. You would think about servant leadership. Management is something that doesn't get talked about often. And yet, management is fundamentally and vitally important to both agile and business in general. We know that you are more likely to resign because of a bad manager than any other reason. We know that something like 70% of your employee engagement scores are because of your experience with your managers than any other reason. So if good engagement comes from good management, and like high attrition or low employee retention comes from bad management, why aren't we talking about management enough? So at the Institute, we're on a mission to reclaim management. Everyone wants to be a leader. No one wants to be a manager. There's the pointy head boss, or the manager, as in from Dilbert, or the manager from The Office, or the manager from Office Space. This metaphor, or this story about the, at best, incompetent and at worst, evil manager permeates business. And yet I want you to think about the people you work with right now. I want you to think about your manager. Right? Is your manager a good manager? Right? Are they a bad manager? Right? If they're a bad manager, have you already updated your resume? And if not, why not? And if they're a good manager, what does that enable for you personally, and how does it make you feel? So I want to go way, 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 way back. And let me bring up my slides. And yes, all of my slides look like this. This is going to be a meme-based slide deck. So management, you're doing it wrong. We're going to go back in time, and we're going to tell a story about a bad manager. We're going to go back to 2008. And in 2008, this was the first year I became an executive. Before that, I'd been a project manager, I'd been a team leader, I'd even run my own small business. But in that time, I got promoted into being an executive director in the Australian Public Service. And this was an opportunity for me to do something new. This was a new opportunity to try and expand my skills, my horizons, and of course my salary and my my authority. When I became a manager, I had taken, when I became the executive director, I took control of a $35 million shared whole of government initiative. And what the initiative was doesn't matter, but it involved multiple teams across multiple government agencies, and it was very, very, very hard. And you know what? I got the job. I got the job because I was a subject matter expert. I got the job because I could clearly articulate how this whole of government initiative should work. But most of all, I got the job because I was confident. I walked into the interview believing I could do the job. Unfortunately, as I quickly learned, I wasn't a great manager. I wasn't a great leader. I was adequate. I was okay. And there's a concept that you may be familiar with that gets spoken about a lot, concept of the Peter Principle. This is to be promoted to your level of incompetence. And that was me. I'd been very good at what I'd been doing. And because I was very good at what I was doing, I assumed I would be good at, I would be a good executive director. I assumed I'd be good at the next step as well. And the truth was I was missing those skills. I honestly didn't know what was involved. And this was my arrogance, all right? The assumption that because of that experience, I would be a great manager. The assumption that management was something that was easy, that I could do. Right? And here's the sad truth. I'm pretty sure every single one of you, or most of you, probably think the same. There are, and I see this time and time again. As I said, I'm the CEO of the Business Agility Institute. We talk to managers and leaders and we hear the same stories. We seem to believe that management is an intrinsic skill. We seem to believe that if we just, without training, without education, without practice, that we could become a good manager, if only someone would give us a chance. Right? But no one looks at any other skill like this. We don't look at doctors. We don't look at nurses. We don't look at engineers. We don't even look at a chef or a server or a brickies laborer and assume that we could do their job without some training. And yet, and you probably do this too, we look at our boss and we go, I could do that job. And you know what? I could probably do it better. And maybe you can do it better, right? Because you know what? Maybe your boss got their job, right? And they've reached their level of incompetence, right? But doing a better job than someone who's doing a bad job is a long way from actually doing a good job. Right? And this is the fallacy of management, right? That because there are so many bad managers, yes, you can do a better job, but that's not the right way of looking at it. And you know what? It's not always the manager's fault. Right? Organizations share a lot of the blame. There was a study by Career Builder that said something, oh, what was it? 71% of managers do not receive any training when they first become a manager. Right? For those of you who are developers or engineers or whatever your role is, I guarantee you've received training. Yeah. And yet managers do not. And yet we know management is a skill. And this is the false journey towards management. And it leads to the worst behaviors of management. It leads to micromanagement. It leads to presenteeism. It leads to, in Silicon Valley, they call it hustle porn. This idea that if you're not working really long hours, that somehow you're not doing enough. In China, they call it 996. This idea of you have to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And all the other managers are working those hours. So if you're not, well, there's no way you're getting a promotion. It leads to risk avoidance and it leads to death by meetings. But each of these is an anti-pattern. It is a management avoidance technique. It's designed so that these managers don't actually ever have to face their incompetence. Right? And you know what the worst thing about this? The absolute worst thing? It's not these managers. It's not the bad managers. Right? It's the good managers around them. Because the good managers around them look at all of these bad managers and they think that's what they have to be. They think that these patterns of management behavior are the right patterns of behavior. And so the good managers start emulating and copying the bad managers, and thus it continues. Right? And thus we have a situation where we have companies where the management culture leads to 15 or 20 or 25% attrition, and people just leave, right? As opposed to those organizations which are sitting at 3, 4, or even 5% attrition, which is certainly much better. But the good news, management's a skill. Because management's a skill, you can learn that skill. Now, ideally, you should learn the skill before you become a manager. But for those of you listening who are managers, you can learn right now. Right? And the faster you learn, the better. Right? I'm not a trainer. I'm not going to sell you management training. I don't even know necessarily where you would go to find management training in India. But what I do know is there are resources out there for you. Right? Learn from good managers. Find and connect with good managers who are out there. Right? The Only Pitch. We have a whole heap of material on management in our library. Check it out. Okay. Now, what does good management look like? What does management that is empowering and inspiring, management that makes you as an employee feel safe and productive? What are those patterns? Right? What is the opposite of presenteeism and the opposite of micromanagement, the opposite of hustle porn on 996? So, you know what? Let's start with communication. A good manager knows how to communicate with their employees. They know how to convey ideas. They know, and not just spoken, but written and non-verbal communication. And they do so in a respectful and an open way. They invite dialogue. Right? Good managers know how to delegate. And I don't mean delegate outputs, I mean delegating outcomes. So what's that? That's not me saying, I need you to do this report by Friday. That's delegating, but that's delegating work. Right? Delegating an outcome is, we need to win the Acme deal. Right? Right? What do you need? That's on you. What do you need to make that happen? Right? How you do something is up to you. Right? But a good manager knows how to delegate outcomes. And this is the slide for long before. Secondly, when you're delegating outcomes, when you're delegating, let me take a step back. Delegating outcomes is only half of it, because I can't delegate an outcome to a team or an individual who doesn't know how to take ownership of an outcome. So managers not only need to know how to delegate, they need to know how to train their staff, right, to take ownership and to take accountability. And we know that people who have ownership, right, and organizations that enable that, we know they have higher employee engagement scores. And if you're interested in employee engagement, I can actually say we're a research organization. Mature, agile organizations, one with, yes, good people management and other business agility capabilities, have on average 24% higher employee engagement scores. There's a little stat for you. What else? And this was the slide for the last one. The next, I've lost my track. What am I saying? My apologies. Sorry. I've already said everything. All right, let me get to the next one. Next, the next skill that a manager needs to have is the skill of instilling purpose. There's been a lot of talk about how to define and communicate purpose and the impact that purpose has to employee engagement, excuse me, and the impact that purpose has to customer outcomes. Right? Employees who own an outcome and employees who share in a purpose create better outcomes for their customers. We know that. Right? So if you can instill a sense of purpose, a common vision. We have an opportunity as organizations, right, to adapt. And COVID-19, we've seen, how put this, individuals who are, no, companies who have a clear vision and a clear purpose, and whose managers who had the skill of communicating that throughout a pandemic, that enabled their teams to take actions and reactions as the market changed because there's a global pandemic, outperformed those organizations that were led and where strategic changes were 100% led from the top. Right? Which actually then brings us to the next one, which is the skill of strategic agility. Right? Now, COVID-19 has made strategic agility a vital skill for managers. Right? This it's not enough to create a strategy right now. It's not enough to create a strategy now and assume that it will be relevant in 3 years' time. It's not effective to create a strategy now and assume it will be relevant in 3 months' time. We need inspect and adapt, those beautiful agile words. Those words have to apply as much to our product delivery as it does to our business strategy. And managers who know how to inspect and adapt strategy to create an emergent strategy, they're the ones who are more successful. And again, we know this from our research. Right? Number 4, right? The skill of people development. Now, most of you are sent on training, right? Because every manager, like every half decent manager, is going to enable you to have the skills you need to do your job. If you are a Java developer and a new version of Java, the Eclipse toolkit or whatever comes out, then yeah, a decent manager is going to make sure that you have access to the training and the skills to do that. But that's not enough. If you want to be highly productive, if you want to be a high-performing individual, part of a high-performing team, then you need complementary skills. You need managers who recognize that that same Java developer needs to develop skills in time management. They need to develop skills in communication, in even other technical skills like SQL or databases, right? And if your manager is unwilling to invest in you as a whole person, right, then your capabilities inside this organization is fundamentally limited. We know from a whole stack of research that developing people, investing in their professional development, investing in their the skills and capabilities drastically reduces turnover and increases staff retention. And what's the number? Yeah, 79% of people who quit their jobs cite lack of appreciation as their #1 reason for leaving. Yeah. We know that investing in individuals increases satisfaction. We know that it improves productivity. We know that all of these create a positive financial impact. Right? So good management isn't just a moral choice. It's not just something we do because it's the right thing to do. It's something we do because it actually makes the company more money. Right? The last skill that I want to talk about is the skill of continuous learning. And not so much for your teams, but for you as a manager as well. It's a good manager knows that learning and experimentation and trying new things is vital to innovation. It is vital to continuous product improvement, in continuous customer satisfaction. If you do not have a culture, a management culture that invests in learning, I don't mean education here, I don't mean people development, right? Then again, your organization will go backwards. Right? And the sad fact is I've seen this problem so many times. I have seen this problem in hundreds of organizations around the world. Actually, I'll give you a real example, or another real example, I should say. I used to work for a large consulting firm, and I won't say who, but you can see it in my LinkedIn profile. This consulting firm prided itself on hiring the best. They prided themselves on hiring the best people out of university, pulling the best people from other firms, and then they put them in a box and said, "This is your job description. Right? This is what you will do," and you weren't allowed to step outside that box. Right? That was your role. And the problem is that, first of all, that's the great people you hire are more than that box, right? But they become box shaped. Right? It's the longer you stay inside that box, well, that's what you are. That's the skills you have. This organization realized that that was a mistake. Granted, they realized it 60 years too late, but better late than never. Right? So they realized that was a mistake, and it's like, we're going to be an agile organization, cross-functional teams, multidisciplinary people, empowerment, all of the right words. Effectively, they took the box away. But you know what? Right? People were still box shaped, right? Because the culture of that organization, right? And the way that management had run and structured how everything was done meant that just because they said, "Hey, you're now empowered," right, doesn't stop that mental culture. People had stopped growing, they'd stopped learning, they'd stopped trying new things. And to be blunt, this is an organization that it is taking a generational change for some of those cultural patterns to be undone. Right? It's not enough for the leaders to say, "Hey, we're a new type of company." Sure, yes, on paper you are, but that culture requires a lot more change than just leaders saying we're different.
So, Ivan, we
So,
have around 20 minutes remaining.
yep, I know.
Yeah. No,
Um,
thank you. I'll ring a
so,
bell after 10 minutes again. Sorry.
well, we'll go to questions in about 5.
Yep.
So if you want to know what happened to me back in 2008, it took a great manager above me to point out my flaws. And I'm going to be honest, it took a while. Right? It took several months, right, before I was receptive to hearing my flaws. And it's never easy being told that you're not performing well in the role, right? And because here's the thing, I wasn't doing a bad job, right? There is a universe of difference between bad and good, right? And I wasn't a good manager, but I wasn't a bad manager either. But because I wasn't a bad manager, I kind of assumed I was a good manager, and that wasn't the case. So being told, being shown how you are not good, not meaning you're bad, you're just not good, it hurts. It hurts the ego, right? And that ego It takes time to become receptive. I was lucky I had a manager who was willing to both tell me the truth and work with me to become better, right? He gave me the time to realize and figure this out. Now, for me, again, I'm being very open here. The magic words for me was arrogance, right? I was being perceived as arrogant to my peers and the people who reported to me, right? And actually, so this is part of the problem. Who do we hire? Sorry, who do we promote into managers? We promote experts, right? If you're a really good developer, right, you get promoted to become a senior developer. Then you get promoted to being a development lead. Then you get promoted into being a head of development. But the skills of the skills that make a great developer aren't the skills that make a great manager. Right? So here I am, right, technically, as good, if not sometimes better than the people who report to me at some of those skills and capabilities. Right? So that head of development is probably better at software development than the junior developers and the senior developers who report to them. Right? But right, as a manager, I was seeing these people who reported to me who weren't as good as me. And it's very hard to step back and let them make their mistakes. It's very hard to step back and coach them to be better rather than just help them do the job. And again, these are the skills of a good manager. A good manager will help you become better at your job, not help you achieve the output that you need to achieve. A good manager knows how to step back and let a team do something and not the way they would. Right? And remember, I was in the public service, which means management was like, we had managers who were there for 30, 40 years and they had their own special ways. The other problem, which took me a while to overcome at this time, and again, with thanks to this great manager I had, was that managers, if you're a manager, how do you see your teams? Are your teams hands or heads? All right? And think about that. If you're a manager who treats everyone under you as extra hands, what you're effectively saying is everything's up here. I can do everything that I need to, right? I just don't have enough hands. I don't have enough hours in the day. I need people to help me do what I need to do, all right? So I need 10 more developers because I don't have the time. There's 10 times more development work than I can do by myself, right? So I'm hiring hands. Or are you hiring heads, right? In which is we have this problem, we have these challenges, we have these outcomes. I'm going to hire people to own them and to do the work. And I'm going to treat them like they own it. And so in the government, there's a lot of minutes and memos. I would, and even as a manager, there were managers above me, and some of them weren't good managers. So I'd write a minute to the minister, and it would go up and down as those above me treated me like hands. So they wanted the words that I would write into that minute to be the words they would have written if they had time to write it, as opposed to trusting me to write the right words. Right? Maybe they won't, they're not the right, maybe they're not the words that they would have written, but would they good enough? Would the minister have read it and understood? Yes. Instead, we would spend 6 months, or no, that's a hyperbole. We would spend 1 month going back and forth until this one-page document was perfect in that manager's eyes. Right? Whereas, I'll be honest, it really wasn't that different to the thing I wrote 3 weeks, 4 weeks earlier. Right? So, long story short, it took a good manager above me to point out my arrogance, to point out my flaws, and to help me find ways to treat people like heads and not hands, to help me find ways to encourage people to make their own mistakes, to give them space to grow and to learn, right? And at the same time, to give me the freedom to make mistakes as a manager myself. And these days, I like to think I'm a pretty good manager. Right? I run a different kind of organization. I run a community organization, which means I have some employees, but mostly volunteers. So I'm relearning what it means to be a good manager all over again in a brand new context. And I'm loving it because I know those principles and those skills. And with a growth mindset and an open mind, I am fundamentally now in a much better place to be agile and to be an agile manager and an agile leader, because why not? Well, let's hit both at the same time. So I want to share that with you. I wanted to share my story. I want to give you the idea of sort of what good management and bad management looks like, the skills and all that kind of stuff that's necessary. And I think we've got 10 minutes for questions.
Yes, Evan.
So I don't stand on ceremony, so if you have questions, please ask. You can come off mute and ask, or stick them in the chat. If you have no questions, I'll just ramble for another 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can go ahead. I had already set up a reminder for 10 minutes when the exactly 10 minutes are remaining. You can go with the flow, just a ring and then.
So, Ivan, great insights. Thank you very much for that. Really, heartening to hear all your experiences, because it helps to hear from the horse's mouth because you have experienced it. So just one question. So it's, when you shared your experience, it's way from 2008, 12 years down the line. So how much do you value is in the years of experience along with some trainings, or with some, more trainings and less experience? So how would you say that, we should groom ourselves to be a better manager than today? Is it just experience, or a balance, or maybe more trainings and learnings and less experience? So what's your thought?
So training and learning definitely helps. Absolute honest truth. This entire week, from 8 p.m. to midnight, I've been on a training course on facilitation skills, because I know my facilitation skills could be better. Right? If someone like me is going to sit there as a student for 5 days, like 4 hours a day, 20 hours, then there's education and learning is always important, no matter where you are in your career. You can always make time for it. I'll also say that there's no replacement for experience either. Right? Because experience, it's not about doing the right thing 10 times in a row. It's about making mistakes. It's when I walk in, so I'm not a consultant anymore. I haven't been for a number of years since I started the Institute. But back when I was a consultant, when I was a brand new consultant, I'd walk into an organization and I got all my books and I know the theory and all that kind of stuff. And I'd listen and I'd learn. It would take me a while to figure out what was going on, and eventually I could help them. Right? By the time I was sort of ending my consulting career, right, I could walk into an organization and I could see the patterns almost instantly. Right? I wouldn't know all the specifics, and I'm not arrogant enough anymore to assume that a first assumption is correct. But those patterns, right, enabled me to be a lot faster. I could walk into a conversation with a CEO with very little experience, with very little experience in that organization, and have a serious conversation and be taken seriously, right? Because that experience helped me shape those patterns. Likewise, as a manager, right? When I had experience as a manager, I could see the patterns in my staff. I'm at the point now I can kind of predict when someone's going to resign before they resign, because I know what those patterns look like. And when someone is having problems at home, and again, developing the whole person means being there for them as a person as well. I have very comfortable shoulders. I'm a shoulder to cry on for a lot of people. Right? So I kind of know when someone's having issues at home, because again, I can see those patterns emerge. I've got to be careful not to make assumptions, right? But it means I can be there for people very quickly. And so you need it both. And again, this is a lifetime of experience. You as a manager, you start somewhere, right? Your first management role, that's where you start. You are who you are when you have that first role. But if you enter that role with a growth mindset, looking for both the education and the experience opportunities, then you're going to develop incredibly quickly and become a very good manager very quickly. Certainly much faster than someone who walks in with a fixed mindset, who assumes they're a good manager because they were a good senior developer, they must be a good development lead. Right? And with that arrogance, which I had, right? With that arrogance as they come into that role, they've got the closed, fixed mindset and they're not open to learn. So this is one of those situations where experience doesn't matter, right? Because all those years of experience they've had they've got experience being a bad manager for 10 years, right? And because they're closed-minded, they have a fixed mindset, they haven't opened up to the potential of being wrong. I was lucky. I got that exposure. I got like slapped on the wrist very early on. So I didn't have 10 years of experience to unlearn. I just had the arrogance to unlearn. So I was lucky that I had a really good manager at the time. Otherwise, I would not be here today.
Yeah. Thanks, Evan. Yeah, this helps. Thank you very much.